The Endless Ladder. In a quiet town nestled between two rolling hills, there lived a man named Thomas who was never satisfied. Thomas had a modest house, a steady job, and a family who loved him, but he spent his days with his mind anywhere but where he was. Every morning, as the sun painted gold across his small kitchen window, he sighed into his cup of coffee, wishing for more. "This house is too small," he muttered to his wife, Clara, as she served him toast. "One day, we'll move to a bigger one. One with a garden and a view." Clara smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "But this house keeps us warm, and our children's laughter fills every room." "Isn't that enough?" Thomas only shook his head. He was convinced that happiness was always just beyond his reach, waiting somewhere on a higher rung of the ladder. At work, Thomas watched his colleagues with a sharp eye. Peter had a nicer car, Sharon had been promoted last month, and their boss, lived in a grand house up on the hill. Thomas drove home each evening with a sour taste in his mouth, feeling cheated by life. "If I could just earn a little more," he'd say to himself, gripping the steering wheel. "Then I'd be happy." But no matter how much he earned, how many raises he received, or how many possessions he gathered, satisfaction remained a stranger to him. One spring morning, as Thomas sat at his desk shuffling papers, an old man appeared at the office door. His clothes were worn, and his back bent under the weight of years, but his eyes held a lightness that Thomas had never seen before. "Excuse me," the old man said, smiling. "Would you mind sparing a minute?" Thomas, distracted, waved him away. "I'm busy. Can't you see?" The man nodded, unbothered, and turned to leave. But before he stepped outside, he said softly, "Careful, son. You're climbing a ladder that never ends." That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. The old man's words echoed in his head like a riddle. A ladder that never ends. What did that mean? He stared at the ceiling, the silence of the house pressing down on him. Was he truly chasing something unreachable? The next morning, Thomas set out early, determined to find the man. He searched the streets, the parks, and even the markets, but the old man seemed to have vanished. Disheartened, he sat down on a bench by the river. The water flowed gently, glinting in the morning light. Thomas watched it for a long time, noticing how it moved with no resistance, no desire to go anywhere other than where it was. For the first time in years, Thomas began to think. He thought of his house, not its smallness, but the warmth of his children's hugs when he came home. He thought of his job, not how much more he wanted to earn, but the quiet stability it had brought to his family. He thought of Clara, her patience, her love, and how she smiled at him every morning despite his size. Thomas realized then that his discontent had robbed him of the life he already had. In his pursuit of what was better, he had overlooked what was enough. When he returned home that evening, he paused at the door. For the first time, he noticed how the light spilled through the window, illuminating the walls covered in crayon drawings and family photos. The scent of dinner, simple but warm, greeted him like an old friend. Clara looked up from the table, surprised. "You're home early." Thomas smiled, a real smile this time. "I thought I'd sit with you and the kids tonight." As they ate together, Thomas found himself laughing, listening, and truly seeing his family. The food tasted better than it ever had, the room felt brighter, and the ache in his chest, the one he hadn't noticed until it was gone, began to ease. From that day on, Thomas stopped climbing the endless ladder. He worked hard but didn't chase shadows. He cared for his family without comparing his life to others. Slowly, he discovered a quiet joy in things he used to overlook. The way the trees whispered in the breeze, the way his son's small hand fit in his, the way his wife's face softened when he told her he loved her. Years later, as Thomas sat on his porch watching the sun dip behind the hills, an old man happened to pass by. His back was bent, his clothes worn, but his eyes still carried that same lightness. "Good evening," the man said with a smile. Thomas nodded, his own face lined with age but peaceful. "You were right, you know." "About what?" "The ladder," Thomas replied. "It never ends unless you choose to stop climbing." The old man chuckled softly, tipping his hat. "And are you happy now, son?" Thomas looked back at his house, where his grandchildren played and his wife hummed in the kitchen. He breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the cool evening air. "Yes," he said, "I'm finally home."